He held the diary with trembling hands, its worn leather and yellowed page guarding a singe everything to the empty room, the scent of his wife's lavender lingering in every word he read, stabbed to the lie he'd been made to believe, for he had to decide if the truth would be the cure. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us. May this moment bring reflection and emotion. That Saturday in Acacia Creek had dawned with a timid sun, promising a beautiful afternoon for the most talked about in recent memory. Eliza, the mute laundress's daughter, was to marry Richard, the mayor's son. The entire little town, nestled in the heartland of the country, was abuzz with excitement. It wasn't every day that a young woman like her, who lived in a world of silence, landed a catch like. There were those who turned up their noses. Prejudice ran wild, but curiosity was even greater. Everyone wanted to see the deaf bride, dressed in white, trying to be what she wasn't. Eliza didn't care. Within her silence, she had built a world of colors and feelings that no one could touch. Richard's love, or what she believed to be love, was the missing melody in her life. For 2 years, he courted her with notes and smiles, making promises that she read on his lips as if they were the most beautiful of songs. She got ready with the help of 2 neighbors, her dress simple but well made, the borrowed veil falling over her dark hair. Her heart beat to a rhythm she felt on her skin, a vibration that was uniquely hers. Mounted on the white horse that Richard himself had sent for, she felt like a queen. The little church atop the hill looked like a dream, but as she reached the dirt road leading to the town square, she saw it. She saw the group of guests, the most important ones, Richard's friends, standing in the middle of the path. She saw the smiles, the drinks in hand, the festive air that wasn't for her. The groom wasn't there. In his place, a servant of her future father-in-law approached, his face grim, and handed her a folded paper. Eliza took the note, her heart already beginning to freeze. Richard's careful handwriting danced before. "Cannot unite my name with." Word hit her like a stone. Shame of loving her, of being seen with someone who couldn't hear the applause and whispers. The paper fell from her hands. The world spun. The murmur she couldn't hear, but felt in the vibration of the air, grew. Women in expensive dresses fanned themselves. Men laughed openly. When she tried to dismount the horse, her foot caught in the hem of her dress. The animal startled at the abrupt movement and stepped aside. Eliza lost her balance and fell. She fell into the dust of the road, her veil soiled with mud, her bouquet of wildflowers shattering on the ground. And then the sound she couldn't hear exploded. Laughter, a collective, cruel laughter that cut through the afternoon like a knife. She lay there on the ground, paralyzed, not by the fall, but by the humiliation. The tears she refused to shed burned within her. The world had become a spectacle, and she was the main attraction, the clown who had believed in the circus of love. It was at that instant that a deep voice, strong as thunder, cut through the air. "I've never seen greater cowardice than yours." The laughter died instantly. Everyone turned. The imposing figure of a man on horseback stood out against the late afternoon light. It was Alistair Davies, the owner of Serene Valley Ranch, the most powerful and feared man in the region. A widower, a man of few words and a steely gaze, he had lived reclusively since his wife's death years ago. No one dared to challenge him. His dark leather coat, wide-brimmed hat, and stern expression imposed a heavy silence. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. He dismounted his horse with a firm movement. His footsteps on the dirt road were the only sounds in the world. He ignored the cowardly crowd and walked towards Eliza. He stopped before her, his shadow covering her like a protective cloak, and then he extended his hand, a large, calloused hand, one that knew hard work. Eliza raised her face, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. They were gray eyes, serious, but without pity. They held something else, respect. She had never received such a look from a man like him. She hesitated for a second, her whole body aching with shame, but the firmness of that outstretched hand was an invitation to rise, not just from the ground, but from life, with the delicacy of someone making the most important choice of her existence. She accepted. His hand enveloped hers, strong and warm, and pulled her up. Alistair helped her brush the dust from her dress, the gesture so unexpected that it left everyone's jaws dropped. Without another word to the pathetic audience, he led her to his horse, helped her mount, and then mounted his own animal. Side by side, they rode away, leaving behind the shattered bouquet, the absent groom, and an entire town with open mouth, not understanding what had just... The news spread like wildfire. Rancher Alistair Davies had rescued the abandoned bride, and Ginput, as the sun set on the horizon, Eliza and Alistair's story was just beginning, under the weight of scandal and the promise of an unpredictable destiny. The journey to Serene Valley Ranch was made in a silence that, for Eliza, was natural, but for anyone else would have seemed heavy. Alistair rode beside her, his gaze fixed on the road, his jaw tense. He didn't try to speak, didn't ask questions. He simply guided her, offering a solid, protective presence that was exactly what she needed. When the ranch's wooden gates opened, a different world revealed itself. The imposing, old main house seemed like a refuge, with its white walls, blue windows, and a long veranda surrounded by ferns. Their arrival caused a discreet stir among the staff. The cooks peeked through the kitchen window. The field workers stopped what they were doing to watch. The sight of Eliza, in her mud-stained wedding dress, beside the stern master, was a scene that would fuel conversations for weeks. The first to greet them at the door was Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, a woman with a tight bun and a suspicious gaze who had worked for the Davies family since Alistair was a boy. "Mr. Davies," she began, her eyes darting from Eliza to him, full of questions. "Prepare the guest room, Higgins, the best we have, and send for hot water and clean clothes. Miss Eliza will be staying with us," for it was firm, brooking no argument. Mrs. Higgins nodded, but her gaze towards Eliza was a mixture of pity and suspicion. For her and for the rest of the house, that young woman was a problem the master of his rare impulses had brought into their home. Eliza felt the weight of those stares. She was used to being observed, judged in silence. But here, in the house of that strange and powerful, the feeling was different. It was as if she were on an even grander stage than the one on the road. The room was spacious, with dark wooden furniture and a large bed with fine linen sheets. One of the maids, a young woman named Anne, brought a basin of warm water and some simple cotton clothes. They were dresses that probably belonged to some old relative. They fit. As she washed, rinsing off the dust and the humiliation from her body, Eliza looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was the same, but something in her eyes had changed. The innocence of the happy bride had shattered, and in its place was a hardness she didn't recognize. In the first few days, she barely left her room. She spent hours by the window, watching the ranch's activity. She saw the workers heading to the coffee plantation, heard the distant lowing of cattle, and felt the smell of wet earth rising with the morning breeze. It was a life that pulsed to its own rhythm, a rhythm she could feel. Gradually, hunger and the need for fresh air made her venture out. She began walking along the veranda, then through the well-kept garden. Alistair left her in peace. He left early for the fields and returned at dusk, his face tight. They dined in the immense hall, one at each end of the table, in a silence broken only by the clinking of cutlery. He, however, observed her. He noticed how she communicated with Anne, the maid, through simple gestures and smiles. He saw the delicacy with which she tended the garden flowers, as if conversing with them. One afternoon, he found her on the veranda, sitting in a rocking chair with a needle and thread in her hand, mending one of the dresses they had given her. He approached slowly, so as not to startle her. He pulled up a chair and sat across. "Oh?" he asked, speaking slowly so she could read his lips. Eliza stopped what she was doing and looked at him. It was the first time he had truly tried to converse. She nodded her head, a small smile appearing on her lips. "My mother taught me," she replied, using the sign language only she. But he didn't understand. She noticed the frustration on his face and tried another way. She pointed to herself, then made a gesture of cradling a baby, and then the motion of sewing. Mother taught. Alistair frowned, trying to decipher, and suddenly a flash of understanding. Your mother, she taught you. Eliza smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. She nodded enthusiastically. That small moment, that tiny bridge of communication was more important than any word. From that day on, he began to make an effort. He brought a notebook and pencil to the dinner table. He asked simple questions about what she liked, about her life before that day, and she answered with written words or with gestures that he, little by little, was learning to understand. He discovered that she loved the rain, was afraid of thunder, and that she knew the names of almost all. And she discovered that he had a gentle side beneath that. She saw the concern in his eye when a calf fell ill, the satisfaction on his face when he looked at the. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, remained wary. She had adored Alistair's late wife, Helen, a delicate woman from the city who floated through the house like an angel. Eliza was. She had hands that knew work, a direct gaze, and a silent strength, didn't know how to. For Higgins, the memory of Helen was. And Eliza's presence seemed a desecration of that morning. Alistair, in turn, couldn't help but compare the two. Helen was like a piece of crystal, beautiful and fragile. He had loved her, but always with the fear that she would break. And in the end, she did break. Eliza was like a savanna tree, strong, resilient, capable of flourishing even after fire. He found himself increasingly intrigued, admiring that strength he couldn't name. The silence of the main house, once filled by Helen's absence, was now filled by Eliza's striking presence, and that, for Alistair, was both frightening and comforting. The routine at Serene Valley Ranch gradually settled into a new normal. Eliza no longer felt like a cornered visitor. She found her place in small tasks, helping in the kitchen, tending the garden, and especially in sewing. Her skill with a needle was remarkable, and soon she was mending not only her own clothes, but also those of the staff and the main house tablecloth. It was a way to give thanks, to feel useful, to weave her own narrative in the place that had taken her in. Communication with Alistair continued to evolve. The notebook became a constant companion at meals. Conversations, once short and objective, grew longer. He told her about the challenges of the harvest, about the horses he raised with such pride. She described the sensations the world brought her, the smell of the earth after rain, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the way the trees danced with the wind. He was learning to see the world through her eyes, a world rich in details that he, in his noisy life, had never noticed. This growing closeness, however, did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Higgins observed everything with an increasingly disapproving gaze. In her eyes, the master was growing too fond of that outsider. The memory of Helen, which she so cherished, seemed to be disrespected, and the gossip in Acacia Creek continued in full swing. They said Eliza was a schemer, that she had planned the humiliation to throw herself into the arms of the rich rancher. Alistair's name, once synonymous with respect and reclusion, was now on everyone's lips, associated with scandal. It was on a gray Tuesday that the village's malice officially reached the ranch gate. The postman, a thin and gossipy fellow, delivered the day's mail. Amidst the bills and old newspapers from the capital, there was an envelope with no sender addressed to Alistair. The handwriting was disguised, shaky, clearly trying to hide the author's identity. Alistair opened the letter right there on the veranda, while Eliza watered the begonias a few yards away. He read the first lines, and his face transformed. His serene expression gave way to a mask of contained fury. He crumpled the paper in his hand, tense. The letter was poison distilled into words. It accused Eliza of being an impostor, a calculating woman who had seduced the naive Richard and, seeing an opportunity for a bigger prize, orchestrated the abandonment charade to hook the region's wealthiest widower. "Open your eyes, Mr. Davies," the letter said. "That quiet little mouse is cleverer than she seems. She'll take everything from you, just as the other one tried." The mention of the other one made Alistair's blood run cold, a veiled reference to Helen, his late wife. Whoever had written that knew his wounds. He looked at Eliza, who continued her task, oblivious to the bomb that had just exploded in his hands. She seemed so serene, so harmless. But the seed of doubt, once planted, is a weed difficult to uproot. Could it be had he been so blind? Would his compassion have made him a fool? He didn't show her the letter. He put the crumpled paper into his jacket pocket and spent the rest of the day quieter than usual. During dinner, he didn't pull out the notebook. He responded to Eliza's attempts at conversation syllables, his gaze distant. Eliza felt the change immediately. The air between them, which had previously become light and comfortable, was now dense, heavy. She watched him, trying to decipher what had happened. Done something wrong? Worry began to gnaw at her chest. The security she had begun to feel in that house suddenly seemed fragile, like a spider's web. In the days that followed, Alistair became more observant, almost a sentinel. He watched her from afar, analyzing her gestures, her interactions with the other staff. He looked for a sign, a crack in the image of purity and dignity she projected, but he found nothing. Eliza remained the same, kind to everyone, dedicated to her tasks, with a sad but genuine smile. The internal conflict consumed him, one part of him, the rational part, the one that had been wounded in the past, told him to be careful, not to trust. Society, the town, the anonymous letter, all seemed to scream the same thing. She is a fraud. But the other part, the one that sat with her on the veranda and learned to read the world in her eyes, refused to believe. He had seen the real pain on her face that day on the road. He had felt the truth in her silent strength. One night, he couldn't take it anymore. After dinner, as she stood to leave, he gently held her arm. She turned, her eyes questioning. He led her to the fireplace room, where flames danced, creating shadows on the wall. He picked up the notebook and wrote, his hand trembling. "Someone is trying to convince me that you are not who you seem to be, that you are here for self-interest." Eliza read the sentence, and her face. The accusation was like a slap. Her eyes filled with tears, not of anger, but of profoundness. She took the pencil from his hand and wrote back, her handwriting firm despite the pain. "The only interest I had was to marry a man I believed loved me. When he humiliated me, I lost everything. You gave me shelter. You gave me respect. I have nothing to offer you and nothing to ask of you. The only thing I have is my dignity. If you doubt it, I will leave in the morning." She dropped the notebook and faced him, her chin held high, tears now silently streaming down her face. In that gaze, Alistair saw no fault. He saw the same strength, the same wounded dignity he had seen on the road. The doubt in his heart shattered. He had his answer. He took the crumpled, anonymous letter, showed it to her, and, without hesitation, threw it into the fire. Together, they watched the malicious words turn to ashes. In that moment, he made a choice. He chose to believe in her against the whole world, if necessary. The burning of the anonymous letter was a watershed. Alistair's gesture, destroying doubt in front of Eliza, re-established the fragile trust that had settled between them. The air in the main house grew lighter, and the silent dinners were once again filled with conversations in the notebook. Alistair felt ashamed for having doubted her, and this shame compelled him to be even kinder, more attentive. He began to insist on her company during his walks around the ranch at dusk, showing her the boundaries of his lands, the stream that cut through the pasture, his favorite spots. Eliza, in turn, felt immense relief. Alistair's decision to believe in her meant more than he could imagine. It was the first time in her life that someone, besides her mother, defended her, chose her side. This feeling of gratitude began to transform into something deep, an affection she carefully guarded in her silence. But peace at Serene Valley Ranch was always. One sunny morning, as Eliza helped Anne hang sheets on the clothesline, a rider appeared on the path leading to the house. It wasn't one of the workers. It was a well-dressed man, mounted on a thoroughbred, his face pale and anxious. Eliza recognized him instantly. Her heart leaped and then seemed to stop. It was Richard. He dismounted and walked towards her, his gaze pleading. Anne, sensing the tension, discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. "Eliza," he said, choked. She remained still, a half a barrier between them. But I needed to. She merely stared at him, expressionless. Continued, his words stumbling over a weakling. The pressure from those people poisoned me. They said our marriage would be the ruin of my future, that I would be a laughingstock. I loved Eliza, but I regret it every minute of every day. The scene of you fallen on that road never leaves my mind. I love you. I still want to marry you. Alistair, who was in his study, saw Richard's arrival through the window. A primitive instinct made him want to go out and kick that boy off his land, but he restrained himself. Eliza's place she held firm. This was her battle, and he wouldn't interfere unless it was necessary. He watched from afar, his body rigid, ready to. Eliza heard, or rather, read on his lips, his entire speech of repentance. She slowly lowered the sheet, folded it with a calm that belied the storm within her, and placed it on the basket. Then she raised her face and looked at Richard. There was no hatred in her eyes, nor love. There was only an emptiness, the echo of something that had died slowly, definitively, and without needing gestures or words. She turned her back on him and walked back to the main house without looking back. The silent rejection was more powerful than any shout or accusation. Richard stood there, still, humiliated once more, not by the crowd, but by the unwavering dignity of the woman he had scorned. He mounted his horse and rode off, his head bowed. From his window, Alistair felt a wave of admiration and relief. The way she handled the situation, with a strength and class he had rarely seen, only confirmed what his heart already knew. She was a woman of invaluable worth. However, problems at Serene Valley were not limited to matters of the heart. A much more concrete threat began to spread through the coffee fields. A blight, an aggressive rust, was attacking the plant leaves, leaving them yellowed and dry. What started as a few isolated spots soon became an epidemic, threatening to destroy the year's harvest and the ranch's financial future. Alistair spent his days in the fields with his men, trying everything. They applied sprays, pulled off diseased leaves, but the relentless stress and worry etched deep lines on his face. Barely ate, barely slept. The ranch, his father, seeing it sicken, consumed him. Eliza saw his desperation. She saw the exhaustion in his shoulders when he returned at dusk, covered in dust and discouragement, feeling helpless. She decided to do what she could. She began to wake before the sun and went to the kitchen, where she prepared bottles of strong coffee and baskets with bread and cheese for the workers. Then she went to the fields, not to give orders, but to work. With a scarf tied around her head, she joined the women in the task of picking these leaves, one by one. Her hands, already skilled with a needle, proved agile in the fields too. She didn't speak, but her silent example, her dedication, inspired the others. She worked from dawn till dusk, without complaining, sharing in the same anguish and effort. One late afternoon, Alistair found her sitting under a tree, exhausted, her hands dirty with soil, her face smudged. He sat beside her, equally tired. For a long time they remained in silence, just looking at the sea of diseased coffee plants. He picked up the notebook and wrote, "Thank you. You didn't have to do this." She took the pencil and replied, "This house gave me shelter. The least I can do is help take care of it." In that moment, amidst the blight crisis, they were no longer master and dependent. They were two people sharing a burden, fighting side by side. The blight that threatened to destroy the ranch ended up, paradoxically, strengthening the ties between them in a way that neither peace nor tranquility ever could. As Alistair and Eliza joined forces to combat the blight plaguing the coffee fields, news of the abandoned bride scandal had already traveled beyond the borders of Acacia Creek. It inevitably reached the ears of Beatrice Davies, Alistair's older sister, who lived in the capital, immersed in a social circle where appearance and status were everything. Beatrice was the opposite of her brother, vain, talkative, and deeply concerned with what others thought. The idea of her brother, respected Alice, young woman without a penny, was, to her, an affront to the family name. Without even sending a telegram, Beatrice packed her bags, took the first train to the countryside. She disembarked at Acacia Creek Station like a queen in exile, her nose in the air, looking with disdain at the dust and simplicity of the. Her arrival at Serene Valley Ranch was like a cold gust of wind, "Alistair, what is this madness?" she said, invading her brother's study without ceremony as he analyzed some papers. "The entire capital is talking. They say you've lost your mind, that you picked up some nobody from the road." Alistair stood up, his face set. He and his sister had never been close. Beatrice had always criticized him for his dedication to the ranch, calling him a country bumpkin and insisting he should sell everything and move to the city. "Beatrice, what are you doing here? And mind your tongue. Miss Eliza is my guest and deserves respect." His voice was glacial. "Guest? Respect? Alistair, please. She's a gold digger. It's obvious. She took advantage of your sensitivity. She's trying to take Helen's place." She spat the words, her eyes flashing with indignation. The mention of Helen hit him, as Beatrice knew it would. But he didn't back down. "Helen's place is empty, and will remain so. This has nothing to do with her. It has to do with decency, something you seem to lack." The initial confrontation set the tone for the days that followed. Beatrice settled into the main house like a toxic presence. She ignored Eliza completely, as if she were invisible. When she needed to refer to her, she used terms like the mute one or the poor thing, always in a mocking tone, ensuring that Eliza, even without hearing, felt the hostility in the air. The first direct encounter between the two was at breakfast. Eliza, as usual, sat at the table. Beatrice glared at her. "Since when do dependents eat at the master's table, Higgins?" she asked the housekeeper. Mrs. Higgins, who by this point harbored a reluctant sympathy for Eliza, was embarrassed. But it was Alistair who replied, without taking his eyes off the newspaper, "Since I am the master of this house and I decide who sits at my table, and her name is Eliza." The tension could be cut with a knife. Eliza perceived everything. Beatrice's look of contempt, the way her inaudible, seemed to poison the atmosphere. She felt as she had on the day she fell on the road, a target for others. Cruelty. Her instinct was to retreat to her room, but the memory of Alistair's hand lifting her from the ground gave her strength. She raised her chin, drank her coffee in silence, and, when finished, withdrew with the same dignity as always. Beatrice, however, did not give up. She began a campaign of subtle sabotage. She hid Eliza's sewing materials. She gave contradictory orders to the maids, trying to make Eliza seem incompetent. And her worst of all, she spent hours conversing with Alistair, trying to undermine his trust. "Don't you see, brother? She's an actress," she said during one of their conversations on the veranda. "She feigns this fragility, this purity, but inside she's a viper. She knows you're a good, lonely man. She's using that. And the memory of our poor Helen? Do you think she would like to see this usurper walking through the halls, using her things?" Beatrice was a master at using the memory of her late sister-in-law as a weapon. She painted a portrait of Helen as a saint, a perfect and irreplaceable woman, and positioned Eliza as her antithesis, an unworthy Alistair, who still carried the guilt and grief for his wife's death, felt the weight of those words. Though his trust in Eliza was strong, Beatrice's constant barbs left him exhausted and irritated. The main house became a silent battlefield. On one side, Beatrice, words and evident contempt. On the other, Eliza, with her silent resilience. And in the middle, Alistair, trying to maintain balance and protect the woman he had taken in. Mrs. Higgins, who at first viewed Eliza with suspicion, now saw Beatrice's cruelty with she began to protect Eliza in small ways. She warned her when Beatrice was nearby, ensured she always had what she needed for her task. The housekeeper, who so cherished the memory of Helen, realized that the true threat to the peace of that house was not the silent young woman, but the master's venomous sister. The climax of Beatrice's hostility came one afternoon in the garden. She saw Eliza tending a rose bed that had been Helen's favorite. "Leave that alone," approaching with long strides. "Don't touch those flowers. You have no right to touch anything that was hers." Eliza stood up, startled by the fury on the woman's face. Beatrice, blind with rage, grabbed Eliza's arm tightly. "You don't fool me, you fake! I'm going to get you out of this house. You don't belong here." In that moment, Alistair, returning from the fields, saw the scene. The sight of his sister assaulting Eliza ignited a fury he didn't even know he possessed. "Beatrice, let her go, now!" he roared, his voice echoing across the ranch. The arrival of the serpent had transformed Eliza's refuge into a prison, but, at the same time, it forced Alistair to confront the shadows of his past and to define, once and for all, which side he was on. Alistair's furious intervention in the garden was a turning point. Beatrice, caught red-handed in her cruelty, released Eliza's arm as if it burned her. The expression on her brother's face was one she hadn't seen in years, not since their parents' death. It was a cold, definitive fury. "Pack your bags, Beatrice. The train for the capital leaves. I don't want to see you in this house again until you learn to treat people with a minimum of respect." He didn't shout. He said the words in a low, cutting tone, which made them even more frightened. Beatrice stood again, a mixture of shame and humiliation, to be expelled from her own home because of that nobody. She cast a look of pure hatred at Eliza, who watched, her heart beating erratically. Without a word, Beatrice turned and marched into the house, slamming the doors behind her. Alistair approached Eliza, concern softening his expression. He looked at her arm, where Beatrice's fingers had left red marks. With a delicacy that contrasted with his imposing figure, he lightly touched her skin. "Did she hurt you?" he articulated, the question etched in his eyes. Eliza shook her head, indicating it wasn't serious, but the gentleness of the gesture disarmed her. A solitary tear streamed down her face. He wiped it with his thumb, a brief contact, yet laden with meaning. Beatrice's departure the next day left a tense void in the house, but also a palpable relief. The poison had been removed. However, fate seemed determined to test the stability of that new dynamic. A few days later, a new crisis struck the ranch, this time not in the plantations, but within the workers' own family. Mr. Henderson, one of the oldest and most loyal employees, a man who had seen Alistair grow up and who had always had a gentle smile for Eliza, fell ill. It started with a high fever, which soon turned into a deep cough and a weakness that confined him to bed. The village doctor was called and gave his diagnosis: severe pneumonia, dangerous for a man his age. Mr. Henderson's illness cast a shadow of sadness and concern over the ranch. He was a paternal figure to many there. Alistair felt personally responsible, visiting the employees' room in the workers' quarters several times a day, ensuring he received the best possible care. But the fever wouldn't break. Eliza, who from the first day had received a friendly nod and a non-judgmental look from Mr. Henderson, felt everyone's anguish. She remembered her mother. As a child, before losing her hearing completely, she vaguely recalled the sounds of her mother's cough, who had also suffered from a chest ailment. And she remembered the herbs, teas, and syrups that the local herbalists taught. Her mother, being mute, had developed a deep knowledge of plants, a wisdom passed in silence from gesture to gesture. Moved by an impulse, Eliza went to the woods at the back of the ranch. With a small basket in hand, she began to search. She found guaco for coughs, eucalyptus to open the lungs, elderberry for fever. These were dormant knowledge in her memory, but now they emerged with clarity. She returned to the kitchen with the herbs and, under Mrs. Higgins' curious gaze, began to prepare the remedies. She boiled the leaves, made infusions, prepared a syrup with honey that one of the workers brought. Mrs. Higgins, who was initially skeptical, was impressed by Eliza's confidence and knowledge. "What is this, child?" the housekeeper asked. Eliza, through gestures, explained what each herb was. She pointed to her chest, made a coughing gesture, and then showed the guaco. She pointed to her forehead, indicating fever, and showed the elderberry. With Alistair's hesitant permission, who was willing to try anything, Eliza began to care for Mr. Henderson. She brought him warm teas, applied eucalyptus salves to his chest, and sat by his bedside for hours, changing the cold compresses on his forehead. She couldn't hear his moans, but she saw the pain on his face and felt the heat of the fever on his skin. She cared for him with a filial, silent, and tireless dedication. Days passed. Slowly, Perceptibly, Mr. Henderson's fever began to subside. Cough became less violent. One morning, when Eliza entered the room, he opened his eyes and gave her a weak smile. "You're an angel," his voice hoarse. Alistair, who entered the room right behind her, heard the words. He looked at Eliza, who had her back to him, gently adjusting the sick man's pillows. In that moment, he didn't see the abandoned bride, the deaf young woman, or the dependent. He saw a woman of immeasurable strength and compassion. Her dedication, her genuine care, was not something that could be faked. It was the final proof, the one that would silence any doubt, any gossip, any accusation his sister might have planted. When Mr. Henderson finally got out of bed weeks later, thin and weak, but alive, the first person he sought out was Eliza. Before several other employees, he took her hands and kissed them, his eyes full of tears of gratitude. "I owe my life to you." That public act of gratitude solidified Eliza's place on the ranch. She was no longer the outsider, the master's protégé. She was one of them. She had earned the respect and affection of that community through her actions, not words. And Alistair, observing the scene, felt his heart fill with a new and overwhelming feeling. It wasn't just admiration. It was something much deeper, something that both frightened and did him equally. With Mr. Henderson's recovery and the coffee blight finally under control, a sense of normalcy and optimism once again hung over Serene Valley Ranch. The gratitude of the ranch community enveloped Eliza like an embrace, creating a shield against the sidelong glances that still came from the village. However, the social life of Acacia Creek didn't stop, and a grand event was approaching, a gala in honor of an important provincial politician, to be held at the town hall. It was the event of the year. The wealthiest families were already ordering fabrics from the capital, and the main topic of conversation was who would go with whom and what they would wear. Before being had made sure to remind Alistair of his to attend. "It's a matter of politics, Andrew. You need to be seen, maintain your connections, and who knows, find a lady from a good family," she did with a suggestion. Even with his sister's departure, the pressure for him to go continued. The mayor, Richard's father, made sure to send a formal invitation, almost a summons. Alistair detested such events, gossip, the falsity, the forced smiles. Since Helen's death, he had avoided them at all costs. But now the situation was different. His absence would be interpreted as weakness, as if he were hiding because of the scandal. And more than that, a part of him, a stubborn and defiant part, wanted to go. And he wanted to take Eliza. He wanted to show everyone that he was not ashamed of her, that he respected her, and that their opinion meant nothing. The idea, however, terrified him. Exposing Eliza to that den of vipers, it would be cruel. She had already suffered so much because of those people. He was in this dilemma when nature decided to intervene. Dark clouds began to gather on the horizon, and what started as a summer shower turned into a violent storm, one of the worst the region had ever seen. Howling winds shook the trees, and rain fell in curtains so dense it was impossible to see a hand's breadth away. The stream that cut through the property overflowed, transforming the dirt roads into rivers of mud and taking out the main bridge connecting the ranch to the village. For days, Serene Valley Ranch was completely isolated from the world. The storm forced an even more intense cohabitation within the main house. The incessant noise of the rain and wind created an intimate, yet claustrophobic atmosphere. For Eliza, who couldn't hear the fury of the storm, the world manifested itself in other ways, in the vibrations of the wooden floorboards, in the flashes of lightning that illuminated the dark rooms, and in the tense expressions on the faces. One night, the power from the ranch's small generator plunging the house, except for candlelight and oil lamps. Eliza's fear of thunder, which she had mentioned to Alistair in one of their written conversations, manifested itself. With each lightning flash that tore across the sky, she recoiled, her body tense. Alistair, noticing her silent panic, found her in the living room, sitting near the window, her eyes fixed on the storm. He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough for her to feel his presence. He picked up the notebook and, by the light of an oil lamp, "Don't be afraid, I am here." She read it, and a small smile of gratitude appeared on her lips. They didn't talk about the weather or the ranch. The storm outside seemed to open a crack in as he began to write about not the perfect wife everyone imagined, but the real woman. She was all but she liked the parties, life here, silence. It scared her more than the thunder. I never knew how to make her happy in this place. It was the first time he had admitted the failure of his marriage, his own helplessness. Eliza felt the weight of that confession. She took the pencil and replied with a simplicity that disarmed him. Happiness isn't in the place, it's in the people. Perhaps she just felt lonely. Her words struck him deeply. Alone. Yes, perhaps that was it. He was so preoccupied with the ranch, with the legacy, that he hadn't noticed his wife's loneliness. That night, by the flickering light of the oil lamp, with the world collapsing outside, Alistair and Eliza shared an intimacy that went beyond words. He shared his pain. She, with her silent wisdom, offered him solace. The storm that isolated them from the world ended up connecting them in an irreversible way. When the rain finally stopped and the sun turned to shine, the bridge remained destroyed. Greater damage had been done in them. The final barrier between master and protege had crumbled. With the roads once again passed, the Alistair's decision was made. Going to the gala, Mrs. Higgins, who looked at him as if he had lost his... As always, he sat across from her and wrote in the notebook, "There will be a gala in town, and I would like you to come with me." Eliza read the sentence, and her eyes widened. A gala? To return to that town? To face those people? The fear and humiliation of the non-wedding day returned with full force. But Alistair insisted, "You don't have to hide. You did nothing wrong. Let them see the strong woman you are. I will be by your side the entire time. I won't let anything happen to you." The promise in his eyes was fierce, protective. She looked at his hands, the same hands that had lifted her from the ground, and felt a wave of courage. If he was willing to face the world for her, how could she refuse to stand by his side? Her heart pounding, a mixture of dread and a strange excitement. She took the pencil and wrote a single word, "Yes." The decision to go to the gala put Serene Valley Ranch in a state of contained agitation. Mrs. Higgins, despite her reservations, mobilized to help Eliza prepare. She knew that night would be a battlefield armor. She rummaged through old trunks and found a dress that had belonged to Alistair's mother, a pale blue silk fabric that, with a few adjustments made by Eliza's skilled hands, fit her perfectly, enhancing her serene and discreet beauty. While the house was busy with preparations, Alistair was restless. The bravado of facing Acacia Creek society hid a deep anxiety. He felt as if he were leading Eliza into the lion's den. In search of some distraction, he decided to tidy an old wardrobe in the guest room, a piece of furniture that hadn't been opened in years. It was there, at the back of a stuck drawer, that his hand touched a leather object. It was a diary, small, with a leather cover worn by time and a rusted metal clasp. He recognized it immediately. It was Helen's diary. He never knew she wrote one. She always seemed so transparent. With trembling hands, he forced open the clasp, and his late wife's delicate handwriting filled the pages. He began to read, expecting to find accounts of parties, friends, perhaps complaints about the monotonous ranch life, but what he found was much darker. The diary revealed a Helen he didn't know, a bitter woman who felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. "Alistair doesn't see me," she wrote on one page. "He sees the ranch, the coffee, the cattle. I am just another one of his possessions, a decoration for the main house. He gave me everything except the one thing I want, for him to truly see me." Every word was a dagger to the idealized image he had built of her. He read about her loneliness, about how she felt inferiorized by the strength and history of the Davies family in that place. But the most shocking revelation, the one that made the ground disappear beneath his feet, came in a series of entries dated many years ago, even before they were married. Helen spoke of her father, a man Alistair had known as a respected merchant, but who, according to the diary, was a cruel moneylender who lent money at exorbitant interest rates to the poorest workers in the region. And one of his most frequent victims was Eliza's mother, the mute laundress. "Father went to collect the laundress's debt today," read an entry. The woman didn't have the money. There was a quarrel. Her daughter, a little girl of about 5, was sick, burning with fever. Father, in his fury, refused to call a doctor. He said it was divine punishment for non-payment. He locked the cottage door from the outside and said he would only return when he had the money. Alistair stopped reading, the air catching in his lungs. He vaguely remembered Eliza's story. Her mother had told, through gestures, that her daughter had had a very high in childhood, a terrible convulsion that had left her deaf. Everyone in town had always treated it as a fatality, a illness. But it wasn't. He continued to read, the horror growing with each word. The girl almost died. Helen wrote on the next page, when they finally opened the door, she was burning with fever, delirious. The doctor said the convulsion damaged something in her ears forever. I feel terrible guilt. Father made everyone swear to silence. He paid the doctor, paid some people to forget what they... He said it was to protect our family's name. Protect it from what? From his own monstrosity. The truth hit him with the force of a punch. Eliza's deafness was not an accident of nature. It was the result of the cruelty and negligence of his late wife's father. The abhorrent debt his family felt towards Eliza's family, the small help his father-in-law always gave the laundress, was not charity. It was payment for silence, a way to appease a monstrous guilt. And he, Alistair, married Helen, united his family to that lie, without ever knowing. He looked around where Eliza would sleep later. He had brought her into his home, offering protection, feeling like a benefactor. What bitter irony! His family, through alliance, was part of the cause of the greatest tragedy of her life. The diary was not just about Helen's unhappiness. It was a testament to the original sin that linked their families. Alistair's generosity towards Eliza, which he thought was an act of pure compassion, now seemed tainted, like an unconscious attempt to repair a wrong he didn't even know existed. He closed the diary, his heart heavy as lead. What would he do with that? Telling Eliza would be to reopen a terrible wound, to destroy the memory of her mother, who likely lived and died without knowing the real cause of her daughter's condition. It would be to make her carry the weight of a hatred she might never have felt. Not telling would be to live a lie. It would be to build any kind of relationship with her on a rotten foundation. That night they were going to a gala. He had promised to protect her from the town's judgment, but how could he protect her from her own history, from a secret that now united and separated them in a terrible and irremediable way? The image of Eliza, in her blue dress, ready to face the world, superimposed itself on the image of the little girl burning with fever, locked in a house. And Alistair Davies, the strong man, master of his own destiny, felt utterly lost. The town hall of Acacia Creek was packed. The sparkle of the chandeliers, reflected in silk dresses, jewelry, and the polished smiles of a society eager to see and be seen. The orchestra played a lively waltz, but the true sound of the night was the buzz of whispers, and all the whispers that night had a single target. When Alistair Davies entered the hall, offering his arm to Eliza, the buzz ceased. A sudden, heavy silence filled the room. All eyes turned to them. It was as if the world had held its breath. Alistair felt Eliza's body stiffen beside him, but he squeezed her hand firmly, conveying a reassurance he barely felt himself. He was devastated by the diary's revelation, but his protective instinct was stronger. That night he was her. She was stunning. Pale blue dress, the simplicity of her pinned-up hair, and the absence of jewelry highlighted a natural elegance that overshadowed the excesses of the other women. But what drew the most attention was the dignity in her posture. She didn't hunch her shoulders or lower her eyes. She faced the hall head-on, her chin held high, like a queen entering her own castle. They crossed the sea of curious and hostile glances and sat at a more secluded table. The music resumed, and the whispers returned. Now more feel the words, even without hearing them. Audacity, shameless, poor fool, bewitched. He ignored everything, focusing on Eliza, asking with his gaze if she was all right. He replied with a smile. First to break the barrier of isolation was under his eye. He approached the table, ignoring the disapproving glances of his father. Eliza, Mr. Davies, voice trembling, I just wanted, publicly, to ask for forgiveness. Eliza, What I did was unforgivable. I was a weakling, a coward. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Eliza looked at him, and for the first time, there was no emptiness in her eyes. There was a kind of compassion. She simply nodded her head, a gesture of acceptance, not of his love, but of his repentance. It was the closure she needed. Richard, visibly relieved, moved away, leaving the hall in an uproar with his unexpected attitude. But the peace was short-lived. The calm before the final storm. Alistair's sister, Beatrice, whom he hadn't expected to see there, emerged in the middle of the hall. She hadn't been invited to their table, but that didn't stop her. With a glass of champagne in hand, and her face red with rage and drink, she stopped before everyone. "What a moving scene!" she shrieked, her shrill voice silencing the orchestra. The repentant groom, the savior, and the helpless maiden. What a farce! "Beatrice, that's enough. Leave." "Leave? I'm not going anywhere," she cackled. An unpleasant sound. "Someone needs to open this town's eyes. And yours, brother. This woman," she pointed at her finger trembling with fury, "is nothing but a mute usurper, a gold digger who plays the victim to steal what isn't hers. The name, the house, the place that belonged to a much better woman. The accusation, so vulgar and direct, hung in the air." Eliza, who didn't hear the words, understood everything from Beatrice's hateful expression and the shock on the faces of the other people. The humiliation, the same she had felt on the road, threatened to swallow her. She felt the ground disappear, the lights spin. But then something happened. The memory of everything she had endured, the fall, the loneliness, the hard work on the care of Mr. Henderson, Alistair's trust, all of it merged within her, creating not a fragility, but an unexpected strength. She wouldn't fall again. Not there. Not like that. With a calm that shocked everyone, including Alistair, Eliza stood up. She ignored Beatrice, ignored the looks of pity and scorn. She took a deep breath and walked to the center of the empty hall. And then she did the unthinkable. She began to without music, without a partner. She closed her eyes and moved, guided by an internal rhythm, a melody only she could feel. Her arms rose, her body turned, her feet glided across the polished floor. It was a dance of sadness and strength, pain and liberation. Each movement told her story, the story of a life of silent emptiness. The hall fell into absolute. The orchestra remained. The once so noisy and full of themselves were now merely spectators, mesmerized by that demonstration of pure and unbreakable dignity. The mute usurper was speaking, and her language was so powerful that no one dared to interrupt. Beatrice stood paralyzed, the malice on her face transforming into disbelief. Her weapon, sound, noise, scandal, was useless against the power. Alistair watched, his heart overflowing with an overwhelming mixture of love, pride, and a deep pain for the injustice he now fully understood. When the dance ended and Eliza stood still in the center of the hall, her head held high, he walked to her. He didn't hesitate. He stopped before her and, before the entire town, bowed and then he turned to the audience. "This woman, whom my sister has offended, has more honor and dignity than all of us together in this hall." His voice was calm, but resonated with unquestionable authority. "From today forward, any offense to her will be an offense to me. Whoever is incapable of respecting her is not welcome in my home or in my life." He took Eliza's hand, intertwined his fingers with hers, and together they walked out of the hall, leaving behind fallen masks, frozen smiles, and a silence that, for the first time, did not belong to Eliza, but to all of them. The night of the gala changed everything. Alistair's public defense and Eliza's silent dance became the legend of Acacia Creek. Social masks had fallen, and the town divided. Some, out of fear of Alistair's power or belated shame, began to treat them with forced respect. Others, aligned with Beatrice and the mayor's faction, completely isolated them. Serene Valley Ranch became an island, and Alistair and Eliza, its only inhabitants in a world apart. For Alistair, the decision to break with that hypocritical society was liberating, but the weight of the diary's secret consumed him. Every look he gave Eliza was a mixture of love and guilt. How could he build a future with her on the foundation of such a cruel lie? A lie that involved his late wife's family. The truth haunted him, but the fear of hurting her paralyzed. Eliza, in turn, felt the change in the atmosphere. Despite the victory at the gala, she saw the anguish in Alistair's eyes. She realized that her presence, which had once brought him a new purpose, had now become a burden. He was at war with his own family, with his neighbors, with the world he knew, and she was the reason. The affection she felt for him was immense, but love she also meant setting free. She didn't want to be the cause of his ruin, nor another problem attached to his name, already so marked by. With a broken heart, she made a decision. She waited for the ranch to fall asleep, under the light of a waning moon. She sat at Alistair's study desk, the same place where he had discovered the truth about his past, and wrote a letter. Her handwriting was shaky, words simple, but laden with feeling. Mr. Alistair, you taught me what respect is. You showed me that strength is not in the voice, but in the courage to be oneself. I thank you for seeing me when no one else, but I can no longer be the reason for. You deserve peace. I don't want to be another burden on your name. I take with me the memory of your love for me. Goodbye. Eliza. She folded the paper and left it on. In her room, she changed the dress Mrs. Higgins had given her for one of her simplest outfits, the same one she wore when working in the fields. She took nothing, just the clothes on her back. Before dawn, while the dew still covered the grass, she silently left the main house. Her bare feet made no sound as she crossed the veranda. She walked down the dirt road, moving away from the only place she had called home. When Alistair woke, he felt a different silence in the house, a silence of absence. He didn't find her in the garden or the kitchen. Panic began to rise in his throat. He ran to the study and saw the letter. Reading her words, a cold despair seized his being. Burden? Peace? He didn't want peace. He wanted her. Without a second thought, he ran to the stable, saddled his fastest horse, and galloped off. The diary's secret, the town's opinion, nothing else mattered. The only thing that mattered was the fear of losing her. He galloped across the fields, his heart hammering against his ribs. He searched for her in the direction of the village, but didn't find her. Then an instinct guided him to the other side, to the road where everything had begun. And there she was, walking alone, barefoot, in her simple dress, her eyes fixed on the dawning horizon. She was at the exact spot where she had once fallen, humiliated and alone. But now there was a walk, a decision. The dew wet the ground, and the air smelled of living earth and new beginnings. He dismounted his horse, and the animal grazed peacefully. Alistair walked until he stood before her. The rising sun illuminated her face, and he saw the dry tear tracks on her cheek. They stood in silence for a long moment. No words written in a notebook would be enough to. The past, cruel laughter and painful secrets hung between them, but the present was stronger. He didn't speak about the diary. He didn't speak about the gala. He didn't speak about the future. He simply did the same thing he had done that first afternoon. He extended his hand. Eliza looked at his hand, the same strong, calloused hand that had lifted her from the. She hesitated. To accept that hand again wasn't just to accept help. It was to accept a life, with all its complications. It was to choose to stay, to fight, and perhaps to love. She raised her eyes and met his. She saw the plea, the promise, the truth that needed no sound to be spoken. And then, with the delicacy of one who knows the weight of choices, she placed her hand in his. He held her firmly, a bond that was finally complete. The sun finished rising, bathing them both in a golden light, and the cruel laughter of the past, which had once wounded her so deeply, dissolved into the morning air, as if it had never existed. The world, at last, breathed in peace again. So, did you enjoy the ending of this story? Did Eliza and Alistair's journey move you? If you, like them, believe in the power of dignity and new beginnings, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our next narratives. Leave a like if this story touched your heart. And, of course, comment below what you thought. Your opinion is the melody that brings our work to life. We'll see you in the next story.